Tov, who just joined us? Who's that?
That's me, Sasan.
Oh, Sasan, Erev Tov. Erev Tov Israela. Okay, so now it's recording. I'm going to go there. So, something I think that I spoke about last time, but I'm going to say it again, which is very important to remember when we go through the different codices of halacha, Shulchan Aruch, Rambam, whoever writes a book of halacha. We have to have in mind that in many cases they took existing units from previous texts and planted them in their book and wrote around them. So even though, for example, Rambam speaks in a very original language, it's his language, but in many cases, Rambam will take a text as is from the Mishnah and will add it to the Mishnah Torah. Similarly, the Shulchan Aruch would pick up text from the Rambam and would put it in the Shulchan Aruch. Why is it important to know that? Because when we analyze the text and the language and the intention of those authors, we have to be able to distinguish between work that is originally theirs and work that belongs to another author, because then we cannot analyze that part of the work with the same tools that we analyze the original writing of that author, number one. Number two, which we're going to see here, in some cases, you'll have units of halacha that are put side by side from different sources, and they're not always congruent. There could be disagreements between them in the book of the same author. This is a classic example, the halachot of pikuach nefesh. It says here, Kol pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat, v'hazariz harei ze meshubach. Whenever there's a problem, whenever there's a fear of loss of life, right? Pikuach nefesh literally means observing the soul, right? Lefakeh ala nefesh. You want to make sure we observe, we are on guard that people will not be harmed. Hi, Michael. Kol pikuach nefesh doche Shabbat, v'hazariz harei ze meshubach. Says not only the care for human life overrides Shabbat, but you have to rush to do it. Meaning, if you don't delay, when there is a question of pikuach nefesh, you don't say, okay, let's be mahmir, let's be strict, let's wait until we are sure that someone is going to die. You don't have to do that. We're trying to call, we call a doctor or the fire department, whoever it is, before we need to confirm someone's death, obviously, right? That's what we want to do. We want to save the person and prevent irreversible damage. For that reason, halakha also says that when you need to call someone or to drive someone to the hospital, you don't look for a non-Jew to do it. You get the rabbi to do it. You get the most observant person. I'm not saying that the rabbi is the most observant, just an example, right? You get the most religious person in town to do it, to show that it is the observant people who does that. We're not delegating it to someone who's lesser, kivyachol, from the point of view of observance. And maybe I mentioned to you, someone recently wrote an email to me that he got to the family where he was staying for Shabbat. He got to his house just before Shabbat, and he saw someone jumping in the backyard, the host's neighbor, and it turned out that she stepped on ants. She's allergic to ants, and he drove her to the hospital he didn't wait for her to call an ambulance or anything like that. And they told him that those 10 minutes that he saved by taking her immediately saved her life. So there's no doubt that, like what Shulchan Aruch says here, that it's imperative. Now, he talks about fire. Afilu nafla deleka bechatzer acheret, וירא שתעבור לחצר זו ויבוא לידי סכנה, מכבין כדי שלא תעבור. Even if a fire started in a neighboring house, in a neighboring courtyard, and you, the neighbor, are afraid that it will come to your yard, and then you will be in danger, you could put out the fire. This, I will go back to this siman soon, but this is in stark contradiction to chapter 334, which comes afterwards, in which we read, Nafla dileka b'Shabbat. What happens if there's fire on Shabbat? That's the same book, 5 chapters later. You can save whatever is in the house. You can take it out. Matzilin. You go in, you wear your clothes. Lovesh, umotzi, here. You go in, you wear your clothes. You tell other people, go take food out of the house. And there's a whole 17, 18 entries on what you're allowed to save. You're allowed to put the only thing you can do is put utensils with water to shelter from the fire, hoping that they will explode when the fire reaches them and they will put out the fire. But they say in the Shulchan Aruch says in 25, נוכרי שבא לכבות אין צריך למחוק בידו, אבל קטן שבא לכבות צריך למחוק בידו. If you have a non-Jewish neighbor who wants to put out the fire, don't stop him. But if a minor wants to do it, you should stop him. You can't tell the goy, you can't tell the non-Jew to put out the fire, but you can tell him, יכול לומר בפני עקום, כל המכבה אינו מפסיד. כל המכבה אינו מפסיד. You can tell the non-Jew, if you put out the fire, you will not lose. Meaning, it's okay if you do it. Now, the Rabbi explains a little bit. He says, כל הדינים הנזכרים בדיני הדלקה, נמילה בימיהם, all these laws that are mentioned here is in their time. Whose time? The time of the rabbis. אבל בזמן הזה, אותם השרויים בין עובדי הכוכבים, ויחשש סכנת נפשות, and you live among the non-Jews, and there's a life threatening situation, you're allowed to put out a fire b'Shabbat. Even that, they say, hakol lefi ha'inyan, it depends on the situation. דאם היו בטוחים ודאי שלא יהיה להם סכנה בדבר, אסור לכבות. If you are confident that no danger will come out of that fire, you're not allowed to put it out. אבל בחשש סכנת ספק, if there's a slight fear, you can put it out, even if it's in the house of a non-Jew. וכן נוהגים. So we have here a complicated situation in terms of the fire. We discussed it a little bit before. We have on one hand, I'm going back to the Pikuach Nefesh Saif. On one hand, we have the Shulchan Aruch contradicting himself in 2 chapters. In one, he says, you don't put out the fire. In 329, he says, even if the fire is in this courtyard and you're afraid it will move to that courtyard, you could put it out. In 334, he says, even a minor who wants to put it out, you have to stop him if he's Jewish, but you can tell the non-Jew to do it. And then the Rama adds, the difference between their time and our time. In other words, the Rama says, the 2 chapters in Shulchan Aruch, chapter 329 and 334, come from 2 different periods. One of them, 334, is almost verbatim Rambam, which is in itself a quote of the Mishnah, whereas chapter 329, which happens to be before that, is a newer text based on medieval rulings. So that could be highly confusing. That's why I always mention it. It's important to see the totality of halakha. Always look for all opinions. Even in one book, 5 chapters apart, you know what happened? Nobody remembers chapter 329. Everybody focuses on 334, where it says you have to be careful, and then the Rama says only if you're sure that there's no something happened here. And we explained it before. I'm just saying it briefly. The halakha of the Mishnah was written at the time when people lived in stone houses with few possessions, big windows, and skylights. So if a fire broke, if you took your stuff out, you could have done without much damage. And if the fire eventually would burn out, and the only thing you would have to come and wipe the walls from ashes. That's it. When people lived in Europe, in wooden houses, in close quarters, there were huge fires that destroyed cities, disastrous fires. And that's the time also that the municipalities started creating firefighting services or voluntary units made up by citizens. The rabbis, medieval rabbis, did not want to say that Mishnaic rabbis did not predict such development of fire that can be disastrous and hazardous. So rather, they came up with this argument. That's why the Rama speaks about living among the non-Jews. They said the fear is that when the fire will break out, the non-Jews will come and loot the Jewish neighborhoods, and then when the Jews will defend themselves, someone will die. And of course, it's just a trick to say put out the fire on Shabbat. How do we know it's a trick? Because in modern day Israel, where there are no non-Jewish neighborhoods in most cities, so therefore, if a fire breaks out, you should have been told, don't put it out. We don't have this life-threatening situation of confrontations with non-Jews. We should have said that, but the poskim say since it was already became permissible, we could continue with that. So obviously they know there's a thing. So it's important to remember always look at the source of halakha and ask yourself, where does it come from? Going back to the chapter about Pikuach Nefesh. Siman Bet. I'm not going to go to the whole thing. Which is important. That you don't follow the majority. What happens if there are nine non-Jews and one Jew standing in a courtyard, and one of them moved into the house or into another place, and the house collapsed, and the other 9 people are dispersed, and you don't know now if the person under the rubble is a Jew or a non-Jew. So that comes from the mentality of you don't transgress Shabbat for a non-Jew, right? So here you have a doubt if it's a Jew or a non-Jew. You don't care. You go and you save that person. But there is a situation where, like, this comes from a very complicated discussion in the laws of majority. They say that if they all left the courtyard, let's say each one of them went into one house and one house fell, you say, oh, we follow the majority. The one under the rubble is probably a non-Jew, and you don't save him. But again, this comes from the remember that I think we discussed that the idea that you are allowed to transgress Shabbat to save anyone was a huge revolution in rabbinical thought at the time of the Maccabees. And because they saw it as a huge allowance, we allow people to break Shabbat to save a life, they limited it to Jews only, because why would you save a non-Jew when all of the non-Jews are your enemies? It's like saving just a random non-Jew in Nazi Germany, which I believe a lot of Jews would have, in given the situation, you can't make a ruling, save or don't save that person. I think people would act on their conscience, and they say, some people would say, even though everybody around me is an enemy, maybe that person is a good person. I don't want to harm him. But when the rabbis made a legislation, they didn't feel that they could include non-Jews in it. Today, definitely, this is one of the things that we need to make a thorough update in halach in Orthodox Judaism, and to say that we must treat the life of all humans as equal. We cannot discriminate, because that not only creates a discrimination against others, it creates the idea that one's life is worth more than another's, and this is a problem. In Simanim Gimel Dalet Hey, they speak about digging people from under the rubble and say, even if you don't know if the person is there or not, if he's alive or not, you do whatever you can to save those people. Alachavav, this is from the Mishnah. Akum shetzaru al ayarot Israel, im ba'u al iskei mamon, en mechalelin aleim et haShabbat. If non-Jews besieged Jewish cities, if they only come to get money from the Jews, you don't fight back on Shabbat because you assume that the war will not escalate. But if they came to fight, you could go and fight with them, and if you're near the border, even if they just wanted to steal your straw, you could fight with them. Obviously, all these halachot again are come from an ancient period when those situations were not. Maybe this was only theoretical, because how would you even assess the situation? I think that we'll see in the next halakha. יש מי שאומר שבזמן הזה אפילו באו על עסקי ממון מחללים, שאם לא יניחנו ישראל לשלול ולבוז ממונו יהרגנו ואב עסקי נפשות. Some people say that in our day and time, this is medieval times, even if they only came to take your money, you're allowed to defend yourself and transgress Shabbat, because if you don't, that non-Jew is going to kill you, and it's going to be pikuach nefesh. The application to modern Israel, right? We have an army, we have a police force, we have a lot of emergency services, we have Mossad, Shin Bet, we have many people who do work that is essential to the safety and the well-being of the state. And there's a lot of peripheral work around them, which is non-essential, but is the support system for the essential work. Same in the hospital, right? You need to provide hot food to keep, let's say, we're an extreme example. In a hospital, the only way that you could clean all the, maintain all the floors, everything clear in a timely fashion and in a safe fashion, is if you use electrical cleaning, vacuum, whatever it is, whatever machines you use, right? What are your options on Shabbat? You have to do it every day. You have to do it on the hour. I don't know. Are you going to say, okay, or let's say you have to clean the OR, right? The operation room. Are you going to say, let a non-Jew do it? And so you're going to search around the hospital or find staff that is not Jewish to do it? Or you're going to do it not with electric machines? What is the rule? This is sort of non-essential, but nothing that it's not something that you could neglect. I think the answer to that, and anyone, if you want to join, I would like to hear.
Cleaning in hospitals is considered essential, so you would do it on Shabbat.
What is considered essential?
I said hospitals have to be held to certain sanitary standards.
Right.
So you have to clean them the same way every day that they're open. So if they are doing emergency surgery on Shabbat, then you clean the OR and you use whatever equipment they're using.
Right. So you have to do it. You'll have to do it. But so in many hospitals in Israel, you're trying to get non-Jewish staff to do it. Now, but the question is, this is the hypothesis I like to toy with. Ideally, we would like all Jews in Israel to be observant, right? Ideally. So let's say that the Orthodox community gets what it wants, and Israel is only Jewish and only Orthodox. Who runs the hospitals? Who does the non-essential work in the hospitals? Who runs the electricity company? Who keeps the internet on, not for people to surf at home, but for the essential internet services of the country? At at all levels of the army or the police force, how do you determine who is essential, who's not essential? So I think that the answer to all these questions is in the book of Vayikra, when we read about the Mishkan. And generally, the whole concept of the Mishkan, because the Mishkan is always mentioned with the Shabbat, right? Revere the Mishkan and observe Shabbat. I think that what the Torah is telling us, look at the model of the Mishkan in order to understand how Shabbat works. What happened in the Mishkan on Shabbat? The Kohanim would come, set the wood, start the fire, light the candles, slaughter the animal, make a sacrifice. They basically and play music while doing that. In other words, they would do all the things that we're not allowed to do on Shabbat in the temple. And why is that? The way you revere the Mikdash, that's the way you observe Shabbat. The Mishkan at the time when it existed was the spiritual engine of the nation. And it had to work constantly, never stops. Similarly, if we have God willing, you have a state where everybody is observant, everybody's Jewish, everybody's observant, right? Not that we don't want non-Jews. We're not talking about sending, Arabs or Druze or Christians away, just converting them all to Judaism, right? They all become, but in order to, we should do that. Just in order to keep segregation, we'll convert the Arabs in Gaza to Satmar, and those in the West Bank to Belz. The Druze should be, Sephardic Chabad and something like that. I'm kidding. But so in this ideal world where like everybody in Israel is observant, right? Who runs those essential and support system services on Shabbat? Orthodox Jews. This is how it should be. That's the I think that's the message from the Mishnah itself. Okay, so now going back to the text, and obviously we understand now that the army, the commanders in the field, should not have to consult the Shulchan Aruch. They're military experts. What they decide needs to be done, and they should not be questioned. Of course, nobody's above the law, and you're always going to ask them afterwards if you think. Sorry, I'm going back to if you think that they did not behave morally. Of course, they have to be accountable, but they don't need another burden on top of that to always ask themselves, okay, can I go to this operation on Shabbat or not? I mean, there's a booklet called Ilchot Tavar Milchama, and I think it complicates people's lives in the army. Each and every soldier is entitled to observe Shabbat in his own sphere as long as it does not interfere with the orders of his commander. And we have to assume that the commanders respect, people's religious practices, but the soldier cannot tell his commander, "I'm not going to do that because it's Shabbat today." That's a problem that exists in the army. How do you manage the army on Shabbat in Israel? He says, if you see a ship which is about to be shipwrecked, you have to save the people there if you know there's a Jew among them, of course. And Halacha 9, he says, all those who travel from place to place to save people who are under attack, can go back to their hometown with their weapons on them, meaning they could travel. And that halacha is also applicable to doctors and nurses, any emergency services. We'll talk about that soon. What happens if, let's say, you have to drive a neighbor to the hospital, or a woman who's pregnant has to be driven to the hospital? What happens? I remember when my wife was pregnant with our first child, I went and I studied the halachot thoroughly, and I did it again with my second child. But then I realized that she's not going to give birth on Shabbat. And later on, I became like more talking to you today, and I realized I don't care what happened. I'm going to just, either pick up the phone and call a taxi or just go there. But anyway, we didn't have a car with our first child, and it was funny because we went walking on Shabbat nearby Vegan in Yerushalayim. We were waiting to cross the street, and the car had pulled over. And they wanted to offer us a ride because they saw my wife, as an expecting woman. They were sure that we're waiting for a ride to the hospital because we don't want to drive on Shabbat. It was very kind of them. We said, it's okay. We're just walking. But there are a lot of discussions, not only with a pregnant woman, also any patient that you have to drive to the hospital. People say, okay, you could drive, you could turn on the car, but you cannot turn off. So leave the engine running until Motzei Shabbat. A doctor is allowed to turn it off, but he can't go. Some say he can go, cannot go back home. The halacha, I think, is very clear. Just like with the case of soldiers or first responders that we read here, could go back to their place. If you have to drive a patient to the hospital, you drive, you park the car, turn off the engine, because if you would not be allowed to do that, you're not going to do that, and someone is going to suffer. That halacha, for anyone to delay, to tell people don't turn off the car, don't park it, whatever, or I heard someone, I think one idea was to put it in neutral and then sort of like let the engine die by itself, whatever it was. All complete nonsense, because all these things are, you're putting sticks in your wheels, literally, when you're trying to get someone to the hospital to save their lives. You don't delay whatsoever. This is the first thing that the Shulchan says at the beginning of the Siman. So let's go to the next chapter. It says, a woman who's pregnant, who's expecting, she's considered someone in danger, and you break Shabbat for whatever she needs. You bring a midwife, you deliver her, whatever is needed. It's interesting. On one hand, he says, you light a candle for her, even if she's blind, but she feels more comfortable with this light around her. However, if you could not transgress Shabbat outright, try to do that. For example, if they need to bring her some kind of utensil, put it in her friend's hair so she doesn't carry Shabbat. Okay, whatever. I'm not even comment on that. It's I think that nervousness, that fear of maybe we're breaking Shabbat. We have to remember the rule. You're not breaking Shabbat because you're saving a life. Halacha bet. I'm saying it even though we read it before. A non-Jewish woman should not be delivered by a Jewish person on Shabbat, even if the work does not include Hilul Shabbat. Again, this halacha that should be updated and changed. Then they define what is yoledet, what is exactly considered that, and how to take care of that baby. We'll get into that. Then they speak about the milah. That you will know, the muhalim will tell you exactly what to do. One second. Then they speak about taking care of an animal on Shabbat. Okay. So let's see. The kupot is, we'll talk about that. Fire, we spoke about before. Okay. So the Shulchan Aruch moves from saving a person to saving a barrel on Shabbat. Let's open the conversation. Daniel, you said it's relevant. There are always questions about that. I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I want to hear questions or comments. Someone, people wrote to me about that because I wrote about that, about fire on Shabbat, they decided not to hesitate when things happen. Someone told me that he was at a Shabbat table and candles fell on the table because they caught fire, and people started discussing what to do, whether it's okay to call 911 or not, or maybe you should put a cup with water next to it so the fire dies when it catches it. They just took a bucket of water and threw on it. Everybody freaked out. And he said, that's the halacha, you could open Shulchan Aruch. And he showed them this is what was written, but they didn't know. I'm sure you ran into situations like that. Any questions, comments, and then we'll talk about other scenarios. No? We're good? Yes, Israela?
Okay. Here's one that's not precisely, I mean, I don't know exactly what to think about it. So walking to shul Shabbat morning, it's really, really hot, get there, and the person who's supposed to leave the air conditioner on didn't, and someone, me actually, was about to pass out, and there's this whole conversation going on about going and finding the person to come and turn on the air conditioner, and you know, and I'm about to pass out. So my husband just goes and turns it on and kind of messes up everybody's mind. So the question is, at what point do you
that's an Orthodox,
act?
conservative,
Orthodox.
Orthodox, okay.
At what point do you consider the need to act immediately versus waiting a while? I mean, passing out isn't going to kill a person,
classic
so, right?
example. First of all, I'm glad that you're with us and that you're feeling okay.
Thank you.
The Shulchan Aruch speaks about, not the Shulchan Aruch, actually the Rama, who writes that in Europe, they used to tell a non-Jew to light the fire in the fireplace in the winter. Even though there was nobody sick, he says, because shakol cholim etzel hakol, great cold is like a disease. And I think similarly, you know, great heat, if it's too hot, you know, for you, you know, someone can pass out. It could be temporary, but there could be irreversible damage. You wouldn't take the risk of that. Am I right? I mean, people with medical experience, let me know. Am I right? Okay, good. So that's number one. You know, you have to know that. So to telling, if there was a non-Jewish person in the area, you tell them right away, turn on. But the other thing is this question: what is really involved with turning on the AC, right? If let's say if it were a biblical prohibition, then maybe you want to make sure that the person is really in danger before you do it. Or if I know certainly that person is going to be in danger in 5 minutes, right? That falls under the category kol hazariz zarez meshubah. Only if I mean, like, I know, maybe in 5 hours something will happen, then okay, give yourself 30 minutes to go search for something, and then but if this is imminent, you don't wait. That's called kol hazariz zarez meshubah. I don't ask questions, even if it was a biblical prohibition. But even more so, if we really study the halakha thoroughly, it was like, look at all the opinions. I wrote about that. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach writes that most of the devices that run on electricity on Shabbat, if it's forbidden to use them, it's only a rabbinical prohibition. When it says rabbinical, it really means the rabbis of the previous generation, the rabbis who were there when electricity was discovered, decided to forbid it. Can't say that it relies on a rabbinical concept, because it doesn't. The only place where you could argue that using electricity on Shabbat is biblical, and where it leads directly to the creation of fire or great heat. So what your husband did was the right thing to do. Is smart, no questions, just go on and set the AC to what's needed. There's no question. But you should ask. I mean, I don't want you to confront the rabbi, because there's a rabbi of the shul.
No, it wasn't. Actually, there wasn't a rabbi there. It was
Okay.
just a community.
Okay.
But
So I think it's important for people to understand the. Sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I suppose what my question really is how to track down a legitimate answer to what the issue was. And first of all, define exactly what the issue was. Was the issue really, wasn't pekuach nefesh necessarily, or maybe it was, or if you can't tell, then how do you act, and how long do you take to act? But where's all that? I mean, tracking that down in the written sources is what's hard.
What Lee did, right? That's intuition. Right there, it says, this is what I have to do. I'm not going to ask questions. That's what I talk about all the time. Halachic empowerment, halachic independence. Don't ask questions. Sometimes you feel this is the right thing to do, you do it. That's it. That's the halacha of Nike. Just do it. That's we should call it the Nike Shulchan Aruch. And I've seen many situations like that People just don't know what to do because they're looking for some kind of a rule book, right? Of a guide. What would I do in this situation? And the rabbi said, they use the word men, but really what they meant, if there's no leader, you be the leader. You have to take command. Am I going to say, okay, when will I decide that Israel is really in danger, right? So no, don't decide. If you think it's potential, that's what you feel, go do it right away. That's it. Yeah, but it's important to really understand the halakha. It's also important to understand, I think, that question. Let's say that what he did was a mistake. It's a very philosophical question, right? Today I had my first class that Michael helped me organize with a group of Jews from Brazil. People who came back to their roots. It was really beautiful. They're all over Brazil, and we studied together. And some of them converted to Judaism. And I know that for them, and I brought it up myself, I didn't bring up the question. I know that for a lot of people who do their first steps in Judaism, there's this great fear of what if I do something wrong, right? That's also, ironically, something that happens to a lot of Jews who are deeply steeped in a very frum household. This is how they feel. That's why on Shabbat they feel almost paralyzed when they see the dinner table. Food is danger. Am I going to transgress the issur of pickling or grinding or filtering? Maybe I should just not eat on Shabbat. But anyway, people have this fear of what if I do something wrong? Maybe I should not convert to Judaism until I know everything, right? And what if even after I do, I did something wrong? So the question is this. When you try to do the right thing, but maybe you missed because you didn't know, because you misunderstood the situation, what harm was done? I'm not talking about Ben Adam l'Havero. I'm talking about between us and God. Let's say the laws of observance of Shabbat, right? Let's say that what he did was wrong, okay? Which wasn't, but if it were, what harm was done? Like the fabric of the cosmos has been interrupted? No. God is upset? No. Okay, God looks at it and says, okay, you thought she was in danger. She wasn't. She would be okay in 5 minutes. You didn't have to turn the AC, but I understand you. It's okay, go on. That's it. No harm was done. I wish, and I said it again and again, I wish observant people would show so much concern and depth of analysis about the potential outcome of an act when it had to do with the feelings of other people. To say, what if I say that? Just if you read what I wrote this week, that person who came and told me that what I'm doing, I'm causing damage to my father's soul, right? What if he would have stopped for a moment and say, is it allowed to say that? What is the source of the minhag, of not following? Am I allowed to say? It would say no. Oh, but people don't stop there. Over there, it's right away. I can make a decision. He made an intuitive decision to do something wrong to hurt me. So, no, really, there's no difference. I mean, there is a difference. Actually, there is a difference. And again, I'm expanding on this. It's so important. There's so many moments like that. If what your husband did was a mistake, no one is offended, and God can forgive. But if that person who came and told me I should not go to my father's funeral, and that I caused damage to my father's neshama, right? If he's wrong, and he was, he cannot fix the damage that was. Not only he doesn't even know that he harmed me. He thinks he's righteous and I'm the sinner. He came to visit Shiva. He sat next to my brother. He didn't talk to me. So those are the situations where you just do what needs to be done. I've heard of many cases in Brooklyn, in other religious neighborhoods, people who fell, broke bones, cut themselves where there's a concern for infection, right? and decided not to go to the hospital. I mean, talk about the religious neighborhood, the measles, this whole outbreak doesn't have to do with Shabbat. But it's not a coincidence that this whole thing happened within an Orthodox community. It's a small group, but I read several articles on that did in-depth research. Wired magazine had a very, very good article on that. And what you see is that the people with the conspiracy theory regarding the measles vaccine, right, found a receptive ear in the Orthodox community. It was a small group, maybe, 40, 50 parents or more. I mean, more or less. But why did they listen to them? Because there's already some kind of a reluctance to rely on the medical establishment, as to say, oh, the doctor will always break Shabbat. They will always do something wrong. So, okay. Any other questions about life-endangering situations and what should be done? Because it's better not to ask questions, just do it. Yeah? Okay. If you have questions later on, you could come up with them. You could present them. I'm going to back to the text. We are, one second. Yeah. Here. Okay. Okay, that's not what happens to us. If there's no eruv and some of your utensils break, don't climb the tree. Also, we'll get into that. Okay. Davar she'en mitkaven. It's an important halacha on Shabbat that if you do something that's not your intention to do it, it's okay. It has to be not an inevitable outcome. Remember, we discussed Pesik Reshe. That comes from a practice of, or like in ancient Israel, at least at the time of the Mishnah, they had a very gruesome toy for kids, basically a bird's head. That was something that kids would play with. So if someone says, I'm going to pluck to chop the head on Shabbat, I'm not trying to kill the bird, just want to create a toy for my kid. They say, can you chop the head off and it will not die? Of course it will die. So you can't do it on Shabbat. But if what you do might or might not cause an outcome, then you're allowed to do it on Shabbat. So therefore, hilkach gorer adam memita kiseh v'safsal ben gdolim ben ktanim. You could drag heavy furniture as long as you're not trying to plow the ground. ומותר לרבץ הבית, כיוון שלא מתכוון להשוות גומות אלא שלא יעלה אבק. And you're allowed to sprinkle water on the floor. That's when they had dust or sand floors. But from that came the minhag for some people not to sweep the floor on Shabbat. It says, אלא אם כן הקרקע מרוצף, יש מתירים אפילו אינו מרוצף. It has to be paved, and if it's not paved or not tiles, you can't use it. And some people still, are mahmir with that even today. Today we're lucky we have we have a very advanced system of cleaning the floor without using water or squeezing or anything. You have Swiffers and others. But in my household, when we were kids, on Shabbat, if the floor got dirty, talking about the old Yerushalmi tiles, we would sweep the floor and then would sprinkle some water and clean it with the squeegee and then dry it out. My grandfather used to say that the most important thing on Shabbat is to have a clean house. And for that same reason, if we have dishes, we'll get to it later, but have you ever heard of the halakha of not washing dishes on Shabbat unless you're going. Okay, so that's something that my mother picked up after my grandfather passed away. She decided for some reason that she's not going to wash dishes on Shabbat, and disposables were not big in Israel at the time. You had to be rich to use disposables 30 years ago. So my mother used to just pile up the dishes from the first meal, second meal, third meal, and even if there weren't too many people at home, it really bothered me on Motzei Shabbat to see, piles of dishes in the kitchen covered with a towel or something. It didn't look well. And it's funny because when her father, my grandfather, was alive, it was the last thing that they would have done. For him, any dish, any plate or cannot remain in the sink, on the counter, or in the dish rack. Everything has to be clean and back in place, whether it's a weekday or Shabbat. And I learned from him. We do the same thing, except if we have gas and it goes well into the night, so we'll leave it and then I'll do it in the morning. It's a good, actually good time for me to prepare my drasha. I always meditative when I do the dishes, but that is again the question of balance. What is the spirit of Shabbat? Not washing the dishes because you have other dishes for Soda Shlishi, or having a clean house. So, touching that, another huge problem, washing the dishes on Shabbat. So if you have a dishwasher and you want to stack it on Shabbat, that's okay. Activate it after Shabbat. If there's a way to set on a timer, then you put things in and you close it and it goes on a timer. Technically, it could be possible. I have to depend on the model, because some people say that by closing the door you activate the timer. So I don't want to get into that. But I don't know. Any of you still wash dishes in the traditional way with a sponge and some? You do? Okay. What sponge do you use on Shabbat? Is there any debate around that? No? Thank God. In religious households, when I was a kid, they started coming with what they call the Shabbat loofah, Shabbat sponge. It's basically very hard plastic. And the funny thing is that the regular Scotch-Brite sponge is also plastic, just woven in a different way. It doesn't absorb water. And even if it did, even if it has the sponge on the other side, it's not really, people say it's squeezing. You're not squeezing because you put the water in and you take them out. Squeezing a fruit, the juice is there, you take it out and you use it to put water in it. But that could be, there are so many different levels of, you can determine how observant the person is by the sponge they use for Shabbat. Some people do it with a brush. Like I said, some people leave it until Motzei Shabbat. Anyway, if people have no other questions, Yosef, you raise the hand. Yes, go ahead. Sorry, I didn't see that.
No,
then I have to finish because my voice is now dwindling. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm wondering,
No, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah.
When it comes to washing dishes, it's using cold water often doesn't get like the grease and everything off the plates. So I just have to re-wash them again after Shabbat ended anyways. Yeah. So is there any room to use hot water on Shabbat, like that, even though it's going into the water tank? Like what's the deal?
So,
how does that?
I don't do it now because my wife asked me not to do it because she feels that it shouldn't be done on Shabbat. So fine, okay. So what I try to do is wash them right away and don't let the grease stick to the plates, or clean it with a paper towel before. But I hold that it's not a problem. This whole idea of water coming into the boiler. First of all, okay, let's make sense. If you have solar energy, you're in Arizona. Do you have solar energy?
I do not, unfortunately, but it's common. When we lived in Israel,
when it comes, you have no problem because solar energy is perfect for Shabbat. And that's, by the way, since I moved to California, when I moved to California, it was 2001. I was shocked that not every house was covered with panels, because in Israel we had it since the 50s. Anyway, solar energy, no problem. Now the boiler depends on what you have. First of all, there's a setting that you could put it like its own vacation mode. But whatever you have, you use, no new water comes in. But even if it does, the argument that by opening the faucet, you're letting cold water into the tank, and now this water is being boiled, is a false argument. I mean, this is what people say. You're mevashel because, right? Mm-hmm. You're not mevashel because the water is not heated to a level which is considered drinkable, right?
Right. Okay.
So, and the only cooking that applies to water is when you boil water to such a temperature that kills the germs, and and now it's drinkable. You're not, even if you only had that amount of water that you put into the tank, an empty tank, and you put in cold water, and it's now heated up to a certain level, right? Actually, it's dafka not like that, because we have there's a safety feature on the boiler to prevent hot water from coming out. So to add this minimal amount of water that comes into the boiler okay, so Michael writes that household water in what NC is North Carolina. That's where we are. Yeah. Oh yeah, Mike is North Carolina. Is 120 degrees. Would you drink tea or eat soup that was heated to 120 degrees? I don't think so. That's it. Very simple. So it's not a vashel, and it's indirect. You open the faucet, water come in. Even if later it will cause, even if you have maybe if you have a mini heater that automatically and it's on gas, and every time you open the faucet, the fire goes on, maybe it's a problem. But you have to check what you have. Yeah. All right. Not only for the dishes, to take a shower also.
Okay, so thanks.
Hot days or cold days. Okay. So, okay, I survived to the end. I hope I was going to go through everybody's email and answers this past month, but wasn't able to do it. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, give me some more time, we'll do it. Okay. So for now, I'll say Shabbat Shalom to everyone. Thank you, Sheldon. I hope to feel better. I need that. Thank you all, and Shabbat Shalom. I'll see you next week. Be'ezrat Hashem.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye.
Shabbat Shalom.